The air in the emergency room was a thick soup of scents: antiseptic, bleach, iron-rich blood, and the faint, cloying sweetness of cheap air freshener failing to mask the smell of human fear. It was my world, a chaotic symphony of beeping monitors, rattling gurneys, and the strained, hushed conversations that always preceded bad news. For 12 hours, I had been a ship navigating the storm, fueled by stale coffee and the burning image of my son Leo's pale face, his breathing a shallow rasp even in my memory. The rent was late again. His prescription copay had tripled. So I took the double shift, my feet aching in protest, my soul worn thin as gauze. Another gurney clattered into my bay, a cacophony of metal and haste. Male, mid-30s, deep laceration to the left forearm. Refusing to give a name, the paramedic rattled off the vitals, his voice tired. I nodded, pulling on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves with a familiar snap. My focus narrowed, the exhaustion receding behind a wall of professional calm. This was the other part of me, the competent part, the one who knew how to stitch and soothe and save. It was the only part of my life where I felt any semblance of control. The man on the gurney was still, but it was the stillness of a predator, not a victim. He was propped up on his elbows, his jaw tight. Even through the grime and drying blood, his suit was clearly expensive, the dark wool tailored to shoulders that were broad and powerful. A watch with a face like a starless night sky glinted on his uninjured wrist, a sliver of impossible luxury in this place of sterile poverty. He didn't look like he belonged here. He looked like he owned places like this. I approached, my voice the practiced, neutral tone I used on everyone from terrified children to belligerent drunks. I'm Alara. I'll be your nurse. I need to get a look at that arm. His eyes lifted to meet mine, and the air crackled. They were the color of storm clouds, a deep, turbulent gray, and they held an intelligence that was sharp and unnervingly perceptive. He assessed me in a single, sweeping glance, and I felt a prickle of unease, a feeling of being seen too clearly. He didn't say a word, just gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The wound was deep, a clean slice that suggested something far sharper than broken glass. It would need careful cleaning and at least a dozen stitches. As I worked, the sterile silence in our little curtained-off world was broken only by the snip of my scissors cutting away his ruined sleeve and the soft clink of my instruments on the metal tray. He watched my hands, his focus absolute. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a tightly coiled energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He was a man accustomed to giving orders, not taking them, and his passive compliance felt like a temporary ceasefire, not a surrender. I cleaned the wound, my movements efficient and sure, flushing it with saline. He didn't so much as flinch, his breathing remaining deep and even. Most men, even the toughest, would have at least hissed in a breath. He just watched me, his gray eyes unblinking. This will require sutures, I stated, keeping my tone clinical. And a tetanus shot. I'll need to numb the area first. No, the word was low, a gravelly command that vibrated in the small space. It wasn't a suggestion. I paused, my fingers hovering over a sterile needle. I'm sorry. No anesthetic. Just stitch it. His gaze was unyielding, a silent challenge. I felt a flicker of defiance rise through my exhaustion. This wasn't a boardroom, it was my trauma bay. That is not advisable, I said, my voice firm. It will be incredibly painful, and you won't be able to hold still, which will compromise the quality of the sutures and increase the risk of infection. I will hold still, he said, the statement an indisputable fact. He leaned forward slightly, the motion subtle, but filled with an intimidating power. Dear job. For a moment, we were locked in a battle of wills. The beeping of the monitor next to us seemed to fade into the background. I saw something in his eyes then. Not just arrogance, but a deep, unshakable control over his own body, a discipline forged in circumstances I couldn't begin to imagine. I made a choice. Arguing would be pointless and would only attract the kind of attention he was clearly trying to avoid. I picked up the suture needle. All right, I said, my voice tight. But if you move, I stop. He simply nodded, settling back against the thin mattress. I worked in a state of hyper-awareness, my fingers moving with practiced dexterity. Each time the needle pierced his skin, his muscles bunched under my touch, a cord of solid steel, but he did not move. Not an inch. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and his own scent, something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold night air. I focused on the task, on the neat line of black thread pulling his flesh back together, trying to ignore the unnerving intimacy of the moment. I was touching him, mending him, while he endured the pain with a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. When I was finished, I dressed the wound with practiced efficiency. You'll need to keep it clean and dry. I recommend a course of antibiotics. He was already swinging his legs off the gurney, his movements fluid despite the injury. I'll have my own doctor look at it, he stood, towering over me, a formidable presence that seemed to shrink the already small space. He flexed his bandaged arm, his expression unreadable. His gaze dropped to the small plastic name badge clipped to my scrubs. Elara Vance, RN, his eyes lingered there for a fraction of a second too long. You're good at your job, Elara Vance, he said, the words a quiet assessment rather than a compliment. He reached into the pocket of his blood-stained trousers and pulled out a thick roll of cash, peeling off several $100 bills and placing them on the tray next to my discarded instruments. We don't accept, I started to say, but he cut me off. That's not for the hospital. His gaze met mine again, intense and unwavering. It's for the inconvenience. Before I could protest further, he turned and was gone, vanishing through the curtain as silently as he had appeared, leaving me standing in the sudden emptiness, the scent of cedar and danger still hanging in the air. The crisp bills on the tray felt like a brand, a payment for a service I hadn't understood I was providing. The encounter clung to me for days, a strange, unsettling memory that surfaced between moments of folding laundry and checking Leo's temperature. The man's storm-cloud eyes, his unnerving stillness in the face of pain. I tried to dismiss it as just another strange night in a long line of strange nights, another bizarre story for the ER archives. I used the money he'd left to pay the rent and buy the expensive brand of nebulizer medicine for Leo, a wave of guilt washing over me even as relief settled in my chest. It was blood money, I was sure of it, but it was also breathing room. It was one less thing to fear in a life filled with fear. That illusion of safety shattered 3 days later. I was walking home from the bus stop, the city air damp and cold against my cheeks. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the cracked pavement of my neighborhood. My apartment building was just ahead, a beacon of shabby, familiar warmth. A long, black car was parked at the curb, its tinted windows like obsidian mirrors. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on the street, a creature of a different, more predatory world. As I drew closer, the back door opened. An older man stepped out, his posture impeccable in a tailored gray suit. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was lined with a quiet wisdom, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. "Miss Vance," he asked, his voice polite but firm. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clutched the strap of my bag, my knuckles white. "Who are you?" "My name is Marcus. I work for the gentleman you assisted the other night." He gestured to the open car door. "He would like a word with you." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. I took a step back. I have nothing to say to him. I was just doing my job. Marcus's expression was one of patient regret. "I'm afraid it is not a request." He was very impressed with your discretion and your skill. "A situation has arisen where those qualities are needed again." Privately, he took a small step forward, his voice dropping slightly. "Your son, Leo. He has asthma, I believe. The cost of his medication must be a significant burden. And your ex-husband, David. His gambling debts are becoming quite a problem for you, are they not?" The world tilted on its axis. He knew. He knew about Leo. He knew about David. The knowledge was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. This wasn't a summons, it was a threat, wrapped in the courteous language of a business transaction. They hadn't just seen my name on a badge, they had dissected my life, laying all my vulnerabilities bare. My struggle, my desperation, it was all just leverage to them. The choice was gone. It had been taken from me the moment that man bled on my floor. "What does he want?" I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hollow resignation. He requires your professional services, Marcus said, his tone softening with a hint of pity. He will, of course, compensate you generously for your time and ensure all your prior difficulties are resolved. Permanently. Permanently. The word hung in the air, full of dark promise. I thought of Leo, of the constant worry that gnawed at me day and night. I thought of the eviction notices, the collection calls. They were offering me a way out of one cage, only to lead me into another, far more gilded and far more dangerous. With a sense of sickening finality, I looked at the dark, waiting car and gave a single, shaky nod. I was a fly caught in a web I hadn't even seen being spun. The journey was disorienting. Marcus insisted on a blindfold, a strip of soft, black silk that smelled faintly of leather. It was a gentle, almost apologetic gesture that did nothing to quell the terror coiling in my stomach. The car moved with a smooth, silent power, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. I tried to track the turns to get some sense of direction, but it was useless. I was completely at their mercy, adrift in a darkness punctuated only by the soft purr of the engine and the steady rhythm of my own frantic heartbeat. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed, gliding over a gravel driveway before coming to a stop. Marcus helped me out, his hand a steady presence on my elbow. Just a few more steps, he said. The air here was different, cleaner, laced with the scent of pine and damp earth. When he finally removed the blindfold, I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the soft, ambient light of a grand entryway. I was standing in a house that was less a home and more a monument to wealth and power. The floors were polished black marble, reflecting the light from a modern chandelier that hung like a constellation of diamonds. The walls were lined with art that I recognized from textbooks, original pieces that hummed with quiet importance. It was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a museum, cold, silent, and intimidating. There was no clutter, no sign of life, just an unnerving, opulent perfection. It was a fortress. It was a prison. Marcus led me up a wide, curving staircase to a set of heavy oak doors. "He's in here," he said softly. "The injury, it's become infected. His personal physician is out of the country, and he trusts no one else." He opened the door and gestured for me to enter. The room was vast, dominated by a large bed. And in it was Julian Thorne, the man from the ER. He looked different now, stripped of his expensive suit and his formidable composure. His face was slick with sweat, his breathing labored. The formidable strength I had sensed in him was gone, replaced by the universal vulnerability of sickness. A fever burned in his eyes, and a dark red flush spread up his bandaged arm, a clear sign of sepsis. He was dependent. He was weak. And he was my patient. A strange sense of calm settled over me, the familiar instincts of a nurse taking over. Fear gave way to focus. I set my bag down and approached the bed, my mind already running through a checklist of symptoms and treatments. I need a full medical kit. Broad-spectrum antibiotics, 4 fluids, sterile dressings, and a blood pressure cuff. Marcus simply nodded. "Whatever you need." For the next 48 hours, the world shrank to the confines of that luxurious bedroom. I worked tirelessly, a ghost in his gilded cage. I started in 4, pushing fluids and potent antibiotics directly into his system. I cleaned and redressed the angry, inflamed wound, my touch gentle but firm. I sponged his feverish skin with cool water, murmuring reassurances as he drifted in and out of a delirious sleep. In those moments, he was no longer a terrifying enigma. He was just a man, burning with infection, his defenses shattered. He muttered names I didn't know, fragments of a life lived in the shadows. Sometimes, his hand would latch onto mine, his grip surprisingly strong, as if I were an anchor in his fevered storm. I learned the geography of him in those long hours. The sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the surprising softness of his dark hair. I learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way it hitched in his sleep. This intimacy was clinical, born of necessity, yet it felt profound. I was seeing the man behind the monster, the vulnerability beneath the armor. A dangerous, foolish part of me began to feel a pull, a strange, protective instinct towards this man who had stolen my life. He was ruthless, he was dangerous, but as he lay there, completely at my mercy, I saw a flicker of something else, a deep-seated loneliness, a weariness that the fever had stripped bare. On the third day, the fever broke. I woke in the armchair where I'd been dozing to find his eyes on me, the familiar storm cloud gray, but clear now, lucid. The predator was back, but his gaze held a new, unfamiliar quality. "You're still here," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "Your infection was severe," I said, my professional mask snapping back into place. "You were septic. You're lucky." He pushed himself up against the pillows, wincing slightly. Luck had nothing to do with it, his eyes held mine, and the intensity in them made my breath catch. "Thank you," the words were quiet, but they carried an immense weight. Later that day, after I had eaten a meal served on porcelain so fine I was afraid to touch it, he summoned me back to his room. He was sitting up, dressed in a simple black shirt and trousers, looking more like himself. The aura of power was back, but it was tempered by a quiet stillness. "Marcus told you why I needed you," he began, his voice stronger now. It was a statement, not a question. I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "The man who did this to me," he continued, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the bulletproof windows, "is named Petrov. We were once partners. He believes I owe him something. He is not a reasonable man." He looked back at me, his eyes pinning me in place. "When he failed to kill me, he started looking for leverage. He had people watching the hospital. They saw you leave. They saw you treat me with a level of competence that suggested a private arrangement. A cold dread washed over me. So he thinks I work for you. He thinks you are important to me," Julian corrected, a subtle but significant distinction, "which makes you and your son a target." The room felt suddenly airless. Leo. My beautiful, fragile boy. The thought of anyone using him, hurting him, was a physical agony. "You have to let me go," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "I can take him and disappear. You can't keep us here." "And where would you go, Alara?" His voice was soft, but laced with an undeniable logic that felt like steel. "Petrov has resources. He would find you. Your old life, the one you were struggling to hold together, it's gone. The moment my blood was on your hands, that world vanished. The only place you and your son are safe now is with me." He let that sink in, the terrible, suffocating truth of it. I was trapped not just by his power, but by the danger he had brought to my door. He then revealed the second, more violating truth. "I had you investigated after we met," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "I know about your student loans. The mortgage payments your ex-husband defaulted on, leaving you with the debt. I know Leo's pediatrician, his favorite brand of cereal, and the name of the stuffed bear he sleeps with every night." I stared at him, a maelstrom of emotions swirling inside me, outrage at the invasion, terror at the depth of his knowledge, and a tiny, shameful flicker of something else. Understanding. He hadn't just seen a competent nurse. He had seen me. All of me. My weaknesses, my burdens, my fierce, desperate love for my son. His interest wasn't just practical, it was personal. Possessive. He had claimed my life before I even knew it was for sale. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I do not leave things to chance," he said simply. "And because when I see something I want, I secure it." The days that followed were a surreal blend of luxury and confinement. Leo was brought to the house, a quiet, professional woman picking him up from my neighbors with a plausible story about a family emergency. Seeing him run into my arms in the marble foyer was the first time I'd been able to breathe freely in what felt like an eternity. He was awestruck by the place, thinking it was a magical hotel. He had a room filled with more toys than he'd ever owned, a gentle tutor for his lessons, and the best medical care money could buy, all orchestrated by the silent, efficient Marcus. We were prisoners, but we were cared for with a meticulous attention that was both comforting and deeply unsettling. Julian was a constant, quiet presence. As he regained his strength, he would watch me with Leo, his expression unreadable. He never intruded, but I always felt his eyes on us. One afternoon, Leo had a severe asthma attack, his small chest heaving. Panicked, I fumbled with his nebulizer. Julian was there in an instant, his large, steady hands helping me hold the mask to Leo's face, his low voice murmuring calm, nonsensical words until my son's breathing finally eased. In that moment, he wasn't a crime boss. He was just a man, protecting a child. The line between captor and protector blurred, a dangerous, seductive haze. The inevitable confrontation came a week later. Julian found me in the library, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and dust. "Petrov is getting impatient," he said, dispensing with any preamble. "He's making mistakes. It's time to end this," he paused, his gaze searching my face. "And I need your help," my heart stuttered. "There is only one person who can get him to lower his guard, to draw him into a place of my choosing." His source of information, he held my gaze. "Your ex-husband, David." The name was acid on my tongue. The man who had left me drowning in his debt, who hadn't seen his son in over a year. "He's working for Petrov." "Petrov owns his debt," Julian said, his voice flat. "Which means he owns him. David is the one who told Petrov about you and Leo. He sold you out for the promise of a clean slate." The betrayal was so complete, so expected, that it barely registered as a shock. It was just another layer of filth on a man I no longer recognized. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "I want you to call him," Julian said. "Tell him you have a way out. Tell him you've taken something of mine, information, an object, it doesn't matter. Something valuable enough for Petrov to meet you for. Tell him to meet you at the old waterfront warehouse district. Alone." It was a trap. A simple, brutal trap, and I was the bait. A part of me should have been horrified, should have refused. But all I felt was a cold, cleansing anger. David had endangered my son. He had sold our lives. He deserved whatever was coming to him. "Okay," I said, my voice steady. "I'll do it." The hours leading up to the phone call were the longest of my life. Julian stood beside me as I dialed the number, his presence a solid, reassuring weight in the tense silence. When David's reedy, familiar voice answered, I recited the words Julian had given me, my tone a practiced mix of fear and desperation. He bought it completely, his greed and cowardice making him predictable. The meeting was set for midnight. After I hung up, Julian took the phone from my trembling hand. His thumb brushed against my knuckles, a fleeting, gentle touch that sent a jolt through my system. "You were perfect," he said, his voice low. "Now you and Leo will stay here with Marcus. No matter what you hear, you do not leave this house." He turned to go, his men already materializing silently in the hallway. "Julian," I called out, the name feeling strange and right on my lips. He stopped, looking back at me. "Be careful." A flicker of something I couldn't name crossed his face. He gave a single, sharp nod and then he was gone. The house fell into a profound silence, a waiting, listening stillness that was more nerve-wracking than any noise. I sat with Leo as he slept, his small body warm against mine, and I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I wasn't praying for my own safety, or even for David's. I was praying for the monster who had gone out into the dark to hunt other monsters on my behalf. He returned just before dawn. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel and rushed to the window. He emerged from the car, moving stiffly. There was a fresh bruise high on his cheekbone, and his knuckles were split, but he was alive. He was victorious. He came straight to me, his storm cloud eyes finding mine across the vast foyer. He didn't say a word, just walked over and pulled me into his arms. The embrace was not gentle, it was fierce, possessive, acclaiming. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of the cold night, gunpowder, and him. "It's over," he murmured into my hair. "He won't ever hurt you or Leo again." The next day, he laid out the choice before me. We were in his study, a fire crackling in the hearth. "Petrov and his organization are dismantled," he said calmly. "And your ex-husband's debts have been settled. He will not be a factor in your life any longer." He slid a folder across the polished mahogany desk. Inside were documents, a deed to a house in Oregon, bank statements for an account with a balance that made me dizzy, a new identity for me and Leo. "This is your first choice," he said, his voice even. "You can take this, and you and your son can disappear. A new life. Safe, quiet, and completely free. You will never have to worry about money again. And you will never see me again, he paused, his gaze intense. Or, there is the second choice, he didn't need to elaborate. The second choice was him. It was this house, this life of violent uncertainty and opulent security. It was staying in the gilded cage. I looked at the papers, at the neat, orderly escape they represented. It was everything I had ever thought I wanted. Safety. Stability. A normal life for Leo. But my old life hadn't been safe. It had been a slow, quiet drowning. I had been living in a different kind of cage, one made of unpaid bills and constant anxiety. Here, with this dangerous, ruthless man, I had felt more protected, more alive, than I had in years. I thought of his stillness in the face of pain, his gentleness with my son, the fierce possessiveness in his eyes. It was a dangerous world, but it was a world where I was not alone. I pushed the folder back across the desk. I don't want to go to Oregon, I said, my voice clear and steady. A slow smile touched Julian's lips, transforming his harsh features into something breathtaking. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was enough. He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of me. He gently tilted my chin up with his finger, forcing me to meet his gaze. This life isn't easy, Alara. There will always be a threat. There will always be danger. My old life was dangerous too, I replied softly. Just in a different way. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. The choice was made. An hour later, I picked up my phone and made one last call, severing the final thread to the woman I used to be. The tinny voice of my old landlord answered on the second ring. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice calm and sure. This is Alara Vance. I'm calling to let you know I won't be returning to the apartment. You can keep the security deposit. I hung up before he could reply. I was no longer that frightened, struggling woman. I was something new, something stronger, forged in fear and fire. I looked out the window at the sprawling, secure grounds, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like home.